this. So now I'm going to officially welcome everybody. And the one thing, even though we're going to jump to this quickly, I usually go through a little bit of a longer intro. I do want to welcome, I think we've got some newcomers with us this morning, which is really wonderful. We hope you keep coming back. We really believe that your presence here and staying connected and learning together is central to all of us co-creating the much needed change that we're all working towards. I do want to read our 7 guiding principles to remind us of our purpose in this space. And that is to ensure authentic diversity, equity, and inclusion through all can work, co-create priorities with a bias towards action and change, share learning and ownership throughout the sector, value strength of relationships over strength of individuals, power with versus power over, expand what is good and assess opportunities for growth, share and be a catalyst for connections, access information and resource flow, and exemplify and advocate. So this is an open space. Anyone who is interested in helping our sector, the nonprofit sector and our community have greater impact is welcome and invited to join us. So please, please pack the word. As a reminder, we will be recording the program portion of this session. The report out and discussion portion will not be recorded. And we ask that everyone stay on mute. And when we get to the Q&A section and you want to ask a question, you can unmute, but then we ask you to mute again once you've asked your question. So that's all the logistical part. I think I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Ann Coffey, the CEO of CNPE, the Center for Nonprofit Excellence, and I'm one of your hosts for the CAN meeting. As you know, our topic today is LMPD and public safety, a conversation with Chief Shields, and we've really been looking forward to this meeting. So let's get on with that, and I will jump into introducing our new chief who joined the Metro Police Department on January 19th. Yep. As the second woman to lead the department. She has been in her role all of 6 weeks. And so there's no question that Chief Shields brings to Louisville an impressive background in policing. She joined the Atlanta Police Department in 1995 after first working as a stockbroker in Boston. Interesting note, during her tenure with Atlanta Police, she served as a patrol officer, a sergeant, lieutenant, and major prior to her appointment to deputy chief, and she was named chief in 2016. So she holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in International Studies from Webster University and a master's degree in criminal justice from St. Leo University, and she's a native of upstate New York. Chief Shields, thank you again for taking time to be with us today. You probably have not, warn's not the right way to say this, but one of the things that we pride ourselves in this new space we called CAN is being candid, respectful, but candid. So I'm sure you're accustomed to that. The theme of public safety is our topic for the first quarter of this year. And last month, Chief Community Building Vincent James, and Monique Williams, Director of the Metro Louisville's Office for Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods, joined us for a robust conversation on the city's response to public safety. And a few themes emerged from that meeting, and we would like to pick up where we left off and go a little deeper into those topics. So we're going to start with me doing a little brief interview with you, and then we'll jump into a Q&A so we can get, to what's on the hearts and minds of everybody that's with us. So let's start off sort of a softball question. How about that?
All right.
So I've shared a little bit of your official bio. It was so long, and so since we were running a little bit behind, I dropped a few things out. But can you take 1 or 2 minutes and tell us something you would like for us to know about you that we didn't cover or that I didn't cover in your intro?
Yeah, the bio, thank you. Appreciate you all having me here today. It's pretty boring, and if I had my druthers, it would be pared down even more. So basically at the core of it, I've been a cop for 25 years. I love policing. I got into it when I had what I call my come to Jesus moment about what my calling was and where I needed to go and the path I needed to pursue that I knew was policing. I've enjoyed my journey. It's where I've needed to be. It's not always been easy. I'm a firm believer in helping others and contrary to what we may be messaging right now. I mean, at its core, policing is about helping others done properly. I think for me, one of the things that I've been blessed with is I worked for 25 years in a city that was predominantly Black, in a police department that was predominantly Black, and it's the birthplace of the civil rights movement. And as a result, my experience in law enforcement is different. It is different than those individuals who have not had that same opportunity. And as a result, one of the things I've been able to see for a good chunk of my career is how policing is not working, and that it is directly tied to race. And that one of the things that we have an obligation to do as police leaders is to speak out on this and get this correct. I love the profession, but the profession has to change, and it has to change yesterday. So that's the platform from which I approach my job. I will do my best to answer your questions. If I'm to be honest, I'm still trying to get up to speed on a number of things. The snow hasn't helped because a lot of things got canceled. It was hard for me to meet people. And so I'm really this week, I'm trying to really start working, but I still am aware of a huge learning curve. So please don't be offended if I'm not familiar with something that I should be. I'm looking at this opportunity for me to learn about those things that I need to know. So there we go.
Thank you. I think you've been here 6 weeks officially and had a lot of
all I know is I need to get my hair colored. So beyond that, that's how I base my journeys.
Yeah. So Chief Shields, transparency has been raised by members of our community as a big concern, as you know, particularly regarding the contract negotiations with the FOP. Can you share your views on this topic, especially how you will handle transparency at LMPD going forward?
So I'm huge on transparency, and I have a lot of heartburn about it here, not so much on the contract negotiations, but more so on the contract that has already been codified and really has really put in place limitations on the chief to drive change. And by that, I mean the contract affords real operational power in some critical areas to the union, and that runs contrary to making change quickly. So I have two very real concerns as I come in here and I'm seeing what has to change to create the highest level of transparency. One is there is on the Kentucky state books at the state legislature level, all discipline must be presented by the chief. What that means is if you have someone who needs 3 days suspension because they can't drive, I have to be the one to present that. The problem with that works if you're a small agency. If you're a large agency, that's not realistic. And then I find out that these hearings are more like trials that are drawn out. The problem is, I've walked into 70 internal affairs that are backlogged, bottlenecked, that have not been moved on. And I'm looking at files of people who should not be employees of this department. And it's an obstacle to even get that moved forward. And so that to me, coupled with the contract that's already been negotiated that does not allow me to move people out of assignments where they're operating ineffectively. So the contract that exists, I'm very frustrated that prior leadership did not engage themselves in it more and ensure that it afforded the chief the authority necessary to be transparent. And so, yes, I understand that folks want the negotiations to be transparent now. And sure, that to me is not the greatest heartburn. Let me reframe that. I'm fine. They can be open. It's not my call. Historically, they've not been open. The greater concern for me is the police department clearly has not sat at the table and led these negotiations like they need to. That for me is paramount to getting us into a space where I can be transparent.
Great, thank you. Um, Another concern raised within the community has to do with listening, hearing, and action. While many acknowledge there are opportunities for input on various issues and concerns, there's also a feeling that input is not considered as decisions are made. In your view, when it comes to public safety, what is the purpose of community input, and how is that input best put into action?
Well, I mean, I think community input is paramount. I mean, we work for the communities, right? So I think the first thing you have to take ownership of, not all communities agree. All right. And when you start talking about what is expected in one area that is, let's say, 95% white and affluent, their expectation is going to be markedly different from an area that is 95, 98% black and maybe is not so affluent and may have economic issues. So the expectation is you go to one community and they're like, lock everybody up. You go to another community and they're like, why are you locking everybody up? All right. So our job is we need to listen to everybody, and we need to police in a manner that is consistent, because this is the problem where police departments get in trouble. We massage and mold our policing to fit the constituent base, and that's wrong. How we police in Division A should be the same as Division B and C and so forth. That's not just LMPD. That's policing as a culture. That's society as a culture. All of you, I can drill down on all of your agencies, your nonprofits. We're going to find that there are discrepancies. That's human behavior. So for our obligation here is, what does the community need? How can we accomplish the needs so that everyone is safe where they are, but they feel that they're being treated fairly, that they're not going to be victimized because of who they are. So it's hearing, but it's also, more importantly, it's us operating in a manner that is consistent and fair across the board.
Thank you. So there's an old saying: you want to understand a person's values, look at their checkbook. Guess where I'm going with this one. To increase public safety, how do you see LMPD's budget changing, if at all? To what sorts of programs will funding shift?
Yeah, so it's been kind of different for me coming here. I always took, and I one thing I do retain from my brokerage days is I'm passionate about money, I'm passionate about finances, and I feel that we have an obligation to taxpayers to be responsible in the manner in which we spend money. I've never taken the police budget and looked at it as, it is my budget, this is what I must have. What I've done is I've always taken the mindset of, this is a city's budget. What does the city need to accomplish? And what do we need to do to get there? So for me, it's always been one about teamwork. How are we doing this to get to the next level? I think that, so one of the things is, clearly there's probably not a police department in the country, and most certainly not a city, that isn't struggling because we don't have the capacity or the support networks necessary to handle all of the issues of mental illness, substance abuse, you name it. Folks that they do not need to be arrested, but they're engaging in behaviors that are drawing the attention of law enforcement. And I will put forward that the largest mental health institution in every city is going to be their jail. And that is a sad statement about the United States, quite frankly. So police never wanted to be the front lines of social work. This was resisted years ago when this first started coming about. We were like, no, we're not going to go. Why would we go down there and deal with someone who's homeless just because they're homeless? But who else was there? As we abolished everything else, they became the police. And so to the extent that we can put in place individuals who are qualified and have more in-depth training than what we can accomplish at a police department to deal with these issues that really are social issues where people need help of some sort, maybe just money, I don't know, but something other than handcuffs. And I'm all for partnering with with these organizations, helping, I know recently they pulled a couple $100,000, I think, out of our budget to work with the University of Louisville on a deflection program. I'm all for this stuff and I'm all for the funding with it. All I would say is that it be done judiciously, because just as readily as you can spend money in law enforcement and it not be purposeful. I don't want us to just throw a bunch of spaghetti on the wall, pay a lot for all these programs and not see them through. I think the deflection program and I think the group violence intervention programs that are currently being driven and looked at in Louisville are fantastic. I want to see them work. I need for them to work. And I'm not, it's, to me, it's a holistic effort. It's not, I know it's overused, but it's so true. You are never going to arrest your way out of the issues. And so to the extent possible, I'm all for other alternatives.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, we're going to turn it over to Anthony Smith, one of our co-hosts, to kind of facilitate a Q&A and enjoy that part of the process. Thank you so much, Chief Shields, for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, and good morning, Chief. Anthony Smith, City United. Good to see you. There's a couple of questions that came in, and I have a few, but I'm going to leave it to the group because I'm sure I can probably catch up with you later. One of the questions was, what is your experience working directly with victims of domestic violence and intimate partner violence, and then also sexual assault victims? Was one of the questions that came in for the call.
So obviously, when you work in law enforcement, you become very familiar, unfortunately, with domestic violence and domestic violence victims. What I have gleaned at LMPD is I'm aware that the officers are trained to make an assessment if the offender is not on scene, and that depending on the point system, they reach out to a service provider. I'm also aware that there is a victim services unit that when I've spoken to the division commanders, they have said has been fantastic, that they can call and they will come out. It's I've not met her, but I believe the individual's name is Nicole Carroll. That's it, and she runs it for the partnership for the city for LMPD. So when it's speaking to the division commanders, they have said that there is actually a good infrastructure of support networks. That being said, I'm sure if someone works exclusively in that arena, there's probably areas they'd say, well, you need to improve here. And I'm more than willing to listen to that. It's of course, it's absolutely a priority, because I think anybody that's dealt with domestic violence victims know that it's a hard cycle and it often doesn't end well.
Thank you. One of the questions comes, we've seen over the last couple of weeks, folks from our homeless community, the camps been torn down and folks stuff in. So one of the questions really is around, how are you and LMPD planning to build a more positive relationship with our homeless community and figure out different solutions than the ones we've been using?
Right. So that was, I mean, I completely agree. So LMPD they actually have officers assigned to work on homeless outreach. They have the downtown improvement team. But what they didn't have is they did not have a policy that says, this is what your job duties are, and this is what your job duties are not. And we learned this the hard way this past weekend, because what occurred was there had been dialogue between the homeless outreach officers, public works, about a cleaning, not a clearing, but a cleaning of this encampment. The problem is Vincent James's shop, and specifically Tamika Laird, were not directly engaged in that conversation. They were CC'd on an email, which if you receive 100 emails, it's easy to miss something. So the problem was there was no documentation saying the people who are responsible for the homeless outreach for the city, they need to be the ones authorizing anything that is proactive. And that just, it wasn't there. And so what ends up happening is you get a shift change, and one officer who knows they're supposed to be doing a cleaning with Public Works, it gets the officer that comes on duty thinks it's supposed to be a clearing. So between LMPD and Public Works, and LMPD, we own it, we did it, we go out and we clear this. Well, okay, that's not the terrain we should be operating in. It undermines all the trust we're trying to build. And oh, by the way, it shouldn't have happened. So now that we got our arms around how this occurred, it's what we're drafting, and I'll have by the end of the week, is a very strict policy that governs what the expectations of these officers are and how they go about it. Because it's imperative that the Office of Resiliency and Community Services be spearheading these initiatives. And we need to stay in our lane or we will screw it up, as we've shown. So that's just the lack of a proper documentation on what we expect of our employees. No ill will, but the end result was unacceptable.
Thank you. Going back to the conversation that you and Ann were having around the union contracts, and we heard you talk about the past negotiation and the frustration there. Now that we're in this in the current one, are there things that we can do or you can do to renegotiate what happened in the past contract, and then what are you all doing to make this current process more transparent and more open to the public?
So the first thing that I'm doing is at the union meetings, it's either going to be myself or my deputy chief, my number two, Gwen Villarwell, at the table to ensure that what is being discussed at these meetings with the union are not serving as impediments to running this department. And so it's imperative that we have at the table proper representation that is capable of speaking up. As far as the transparency piece, I am aware that the mayor's office has been working in this arena. They've been looking at some other cities to see if they do that, how it's worked out. Again, I don't have a strong opinion on this one way or another. What I value is that at the end of the day, we have a contract that allows the police department to operate in a manner that meets the needs of the community. I will say to you that the public does have a chance to weigh in on the contract because the contract has to be voted on and approved by City Council. So it will be discussed in an open forum, which is why it's important that you know your City Council representative, that you communicate with them and they hear you. I realize that is not what some people are seeking. They want to be a part of the ongoing day-to-day negotiation piece. And I understand that. And all I can say is this is a process I'm clearly still trying to get my arms around, just even for myself.
As you, to that point, and I think I heard you when you was talking to Ann, who actually has who pulls that lever to make that happen? Who does have the authority to say we can make this an open process?
You know what? And this is where I've just got to take the hit. I don't know.
Okay.
I just do not know. And I'm sorry. I just don't know.
Okay. Ashley, Chief, and Chief James, can we figure that out and get back to folks so we can have that information? Is there a way for us to find that out?
We can find that out.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
This is Kelly Watson.
Hey, Kelly.
Hi. The answer to your question previously was that it would have to be negotiated within the ground rules if you were trying to make that open. So they would have to agree as well as Metro.
So it's got to be with the FOP?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes.
negotiation there? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome.
Going back to other questions that are in the chat box, going back to community relationships and trust, focused predominantly on the Black community. How are you going to build that, and what's been done, and how do you measure that as you move forward?
So I think that, and that's probably the question that I've gotten most often since I came here. And I think we all know there is not an easy solution. There's not a quick fix. And so I think it's a number of measures at once. It's meeting with as many people as possible, letting them know that I'm hearing them, hearing what their concerns are, At the end of the day, though, I will tell you, trust is not going to just come at a certain defined date. Trust will come in time, and it will need to be groomed every single day. And at the end of the day, that trust will start to come our way when our job performance shows that we have changed how we do business. I can speak all day long, I can do interviews all day long, but at the end of the day, how those beat cops are performing when they're interacting with the public is what is going to give us an air of legitimacy. And it's not something, I don't look at it as something, it's a 90-day plan, a 6-month plan. I look at this agency has an obligation for the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, you get the picture, to operate in a manner that shows that it is truly attuned to the space that we are operating in.
And as you think about that, and you talked about performances, how do you track that at the individual beat level to the precinct, I mean, to the division, and then also to the top? And how do you then report that back out to community?
Absolutely. And so the first thing is, I will say that the Hilliard-Heinz report that was done by the city, if you've not read it, it's worth reading. I really was fortunate to come in at the time this was being published. It's essentially, it drilled down on the operations of LMPD in all manners and aspects and put forward recommendations for improvement. So I really was able to walk in the door and get a roadmap for success and change. And this is key because we might be sitting here looking at something, I'm assuming, if you will, are in this group, there's probably some similar belief that you care about the communities, you want change. But the reality of it is, I can go and I can say to you, I know that we did X and Y wrong within the agency. I can just tell you that as someone who has worked in law enforcement this many years. But to a skeptic, of which there are many, and that goes back to neighborhoods are different, and it's not just cross color lines, they'll say, well, that's not true. What the Hilliard-Heinz report did is it put forward essential data to show that, no, this is a problem. This is a problem. We don't need to spend more time discussing this problem, analyzing it. It's a problem. We need to fix this. So the report was huge in that regard. And I think one of the things that we absolutely have to start doing a better job of is getting real-time audits and getting the technology in the space, because I don't want to hear that in 3 months, I'll get feedback on how we're operating on a specific beat or a division. I need to know at the end of the week, what are we seeing? Because if you want to correct an individual's behavior, you've got to be getting real-time data and providing them with real-time instruction. And I think one of the things that I look at, and this is why I'm so caught up on the disciplinary process here, it's not automated. The files are 2 and 3 years old. Well, if I want to correct your behavior, even if it's not egregious, what purpose is it if I'm coming to you 2 and 3 years old from a training standpoint? Never mind if someone should have been terminated, but what good is just the feedback that maybe I could have changed your performance at that period to make you a valuable employee? So auditing is going to be a huge component of it. And we're trying to work with, not trying to work with, we are going to have an outward facing scorecard, if you will, because to me, I want to report out to the public. When I'm reporting out to the public, I'm also messaging to the department. This is what we're doing. This is what we're not doing. And we have an obligation to be transparent and to show where we are making gains and where we are not. And so that is going to be a huge component of it. But I have no intention of keeping it. I don't know most of you, but you will learn that you think you're candid. You've met your challenge. I can one-up each one of you, I'm pretty much sure, for better or worse for my career path.
One more question around that, and when you talk about your data and how you get that, are there ways? Are you going to create ways for community members to also report in a more in a way that keeps them safe? Is there a way for community members to also report back around their interactions with police, and how are you going to track that?
Listen, I absolutely would welcome that. I'm not aware that right now there's a platform where that can be done in a manner like you're saying. Like, I'm assuming you're speaking of something other than internal affairs, filing a complaint, but more of just a real-time feedback. I don't know. I don't think that platform exists. And one of the things that I'm really trying to push here is getting technology in some key areas. I think that would be fantastic, and I don't disagree with you. I would welcome that, but I don't think in the format that you're describing, I don't think it's up and running yet.
Thank you. There's a question around the meetings. You was at one a couple of Saturdays ago that was full of good intentions, but did not result in good productive dialogue. Are you planning on having any smaller non-Zoom meetings in community and without the mayor present with you, just to be so that you can build community relationships? Or is that a part of your plan moving forward?
Oh my heavens! So first off, allow me to say this: that was not organized in a manner that we thought that it was going to be Zoom, and it wasn't. Yeah, I mean, that unfortunately, it did not. It went sideways. I think the moderator got a little in over their head, quite honestly. And the one thing that I felt really bad about that meeting was, and you couldn't see it, but it was almost like I was in a church where you had the bride's family on one side and the groom's on the other. And the bride's family had one agenda and the groom's family had another. And there was a lot of folks on the groom's side who had questions, and they weren't able to be heard. They weren't able to ask the questions. We weren't able to have a dialogue. So I'm a huge believer in, I love doing community meetings. I love hearing from people. This is how you find out how the department is truly performing. So I'm absolutely all in on that. And I do think it's, and I know with COVID, it's really put a damper on a number of like the smaller, more informal sessions, but those are the ones that I think can often be the most productive. So it's not about it being on a media platform. That's not a priority for me. It's more just getting out and meeting the people.
And I know I'm getting close to wrap up time, so I want to put one thing out there. Now, there's one question, and we're not going to get to all of them, you all, but what we will do is pull them all together out of the chat box, get them over to the chief, and hopefully she can respond writtenly, and we'll get them back to you. One, there's an offer on the table from Ben Reno Weber, who's part of a robust local data community who would be willing to help with the real-time reporting system. So yes. You got folks in the city who said they'd be helpful there, and then I know the city got some folks there too. But there's a question here around ICE. It says the city of Louisville has an ordinance that clearly states that LMPD should not collaborate with the discriminatory ICE policies. Are you acquainted with that ordinance, and are you willing to enforce it?
Oh, absolutely. And I actually had someone asked me about this a week ago on a community meeting, and I did. I had to go back and see what the ordinance was that the city had. And since then, I've met with multiple people in LMPD who have assured me we've had zero cooperation with ICE on immigration efforts. And listen, we had 173 homicides. The shootings are out of control. We need to get a handle on violent crime in the city. That is the priority. That is our priority, and we are going to get handle on violent crime. And I need everyone to be working towards that. So yes, I hope that answers your question.
It did. A follow-up to that too is that in the past, the immigrant community and the refugee community had an opportunity to meet with the chief. Are you willing to continue that relationship and partnership and spend time with the immigrant and refugee community?
Absolutely. And ironically, I think that was the meeting that was also the same time right today, and there was confusion on which meeting I would be at. And Ashley Parrott she just knocked out her opponent and told me, so I ended up here. So yes, I will absolutely be at their meeting. Yep.
And again, like I said, I probably have a number of questions myself. I want to go back to, I think to your point around this 173 homicides. I think we're at 28 to date this year. If I got my numbers right, I could be wrong. what are their plans to really address that issue? I know you talked about the alternative programs that you're looking at, but what are the strategies and how can community be supportive in that work?
So there's what you got. You have to have a number of concurrent efforts moving real time. And one of them is, quite honestly, getting illegal guns off the street. And so when I'm coming in here now, what am I finding? I'm finding a department that the officers, by and large, genuinely care. They really want to work. They want to do the job, but they also have concerns about whether they will be supported in doing the job. And what that mindset has created, and I can see it, and you can see it in the data, is it's a very reactionary department right now as opposed to proactive. Policing done properly is proactive, but you have to do it in such a manner that you are actually targeting those individuals who are committing the violent crime and not being just data driven. And by that, I mean getting arrest numbers, high arrest numbers. So what I'm working on is reassuring the officers that we do want them to work. We need them to work, and they're expected to work. However, in saying that, yes, you will be held accountable. You'll be held accountable. You need to operate in a manner that's consistent with the training of the police academy. So the first step is just rebuilding the morale to a point that folks feel comfortable working. The department still is very heavily focused on narcotics and drug seizures. Problem with that is you may get someone off the street who is engaged in the narcotics trade and violent crime, or you may just get someone who's got an ounce of weed. And the reality of it is the person smoking the weed, the recreational weed, is not driving violent crime, which is why the paradigm needs to be shifted, and they need to focus on violent crime, illegal guns. Because when you are focusing on those individuals who possess and are willing to use illegal guns, what happens is not only when you get them off the street, but you will roll up into that and you will get drugs off the street, because the drugs, the violence, and the guns go together. But you have to triage it properly. So what I'm working on and making some shuffles in personnel so that the direction of the department is focused on violent crime and not the drugs and drug seizures. Because what I'm seeing here is there's been some very good seizures, but what I'm not seeing is that we're getting the people who are driving the violence. So there is, it just has to be, there has to be a modification to the operations to garner greater success.
Yeah, so we'll close out with the last question around, Louisville's at a place where we're dealing with lack of justice for Breonna Taylor and the loss of life there, and then also the other lives that were lost, Dave McAtee and others post Breonna. How are you planning on really rebuilding that trust, honoring her life, and creating a space where we have another Breonna Taylor cannot happen in this city? What is that? And a part of that is what made you, knowing all of that was going on, what attracted you to Louisville to come and do this work that has all of that going on?
Breonna can't happen again. Breonna should not have happened. All right. I mean, she should not have happened. And when I first started reading about what had occurred, be mindful, everything was kind of blowing up across the United States. So it wasn't just that, it was just when I really had time to just focus on LMPD, it was heartbreaking. I mean, this should not have happened. You should be able to be in your home and secure and safe in your home. And this should not have happened. Stepping aside of it, once the full investigative file was released, I was stepped aside and looked at it through the police lens. And I could see all of the missteps that had occurred, that if one thing had gone differently, she would be alive. That means it's avoidable. It was wholly avoidable. As someone who has been in this space and come up in an environment where there is a high level of awareness of the disparities in policing between the Black and white communities, this resonated with me. Coupled with, in 2007, we had a similar scenario where our officers falsified a warrant and ended up killing a 95-year-old Black woman in her house. So for me, when I'm seeing this, I'm able to map exactly how LMPD is going to respond because I've been there. There's going to be the first off, the denial that the officers did anything wrong. Then maybe it was a few officers that cut corners. Then maybe it's the modification. Well, you know, had we not knocked on the door, we wouldn't have had this problem. Then it's going to be victim shaming. I'd been there. I knew where this was going to go. And I also knew that you have to take ownership of this, really understand how responsible you are for the agency to prove and get better. So as I come in here today, my obligation is, first and foremost, I need officers to understand that when they are going into minority communities, specifically Black communities, that they know the history of law enforcement in Black communities, right? That was always central to our teachings at the Atlanta Police Department, and it was really helpful when we got the Center for Civil and Human Rights. I'd make the recruits go there, and they would teach them for a day. Because when you see Black people being bitten by dogs, beaten with nightsticks with people on horses, who are the ones on the horses? Who are the ones with the dogs? Everyone's a white male. That is how we've been operating. That is our association. And this isn't going back 200 years. This isn't that long ago. So what I need our officers to understand is when they go into a white community and you smile and you say, hey, will you buy me a cup of coffee? I mean, that's great. That's great. But by the same token, if I go in a Black community and the Black male on the street averts eye contact and walks away, it doesn't mean he's dealing drugs. It may mean he just doesn't trust me. So you understand the history. And then once you understand where the person is mentally, then you have practices that are in place and policies that are consistent through every neighborhood and how we do the job. The greatest tribute that I can give Breonna Taylor is to get this department to a space where they understand that this should not have happened, that they bear responsibility for this, however well-intentioned, and that we have to do better and that we do better. That's where we're going.
Thank you for the time, Chief.
Thank you.
We'll be able to get you back after you've had some time to update us on where we are and where you are.
Thank you.
I did not get to all the questions, as I said, and I'm sorry, folks, for who put questions in the chat box. We will make sure that the Chief gets those and try to get answers back for you all. I'm going to turn it over to Ashley now to get us ready for our group so we can have some candid conversations together.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Okay. Yeah. So now is the opportunity, since, you know, we take everything that we've heard today from Chief Shields, and I know there are a lot of hanging questions. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to take some of the thoughts that are in your head and some of the questions that we were seeing in the chat and take it into these small group breakouts. So we have about 20 minutes to do our regular breakout activity, our candid breakouts. And I want you to think about three key things as you move into those spaces. One is, you know, what reflections do you have based on what you heard from Chief Shields and based on what you see in the community on a regular basis? What questions do you have and what more would you like to know? You know, we would like to be able to take this information back to LMPD for additional feedback, response, and maybe at some point additional dialogue with this group. So think about what are the questions you have, what didn't you hear that you would like to hear back from them, and what can nonprofits do to engage with LMPD to increase public safety. So those are the critical questions we want you to respond to. At the end of the breakouts, we'll come back as a group and just have general discussion about, you know, what we're thinking and what we're hearing and what some potential next steps could be. I just want to remind you that these candid sessions are serving a dual purpose. One is to make sure that we are intentionally making new connections all the time. We have new people coming to these meetings, which is wonderful. So we need to continue to deepen those relationships among ourselves. And the other is to learn and generate ideas, you know, with bias towards action. So it's a reflection of what we're hearing and thinking, but then what does that mean for us as a community? So we will move into those groups. When you're in the groups, make sure to identify a facilitator if you do not have one, a note taker, and somebody that'll be prepared to report out for your group. And I think that's it. Let's hit it.